Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode of Golf and Politics. We recorded what we call episode 0. It was just really us getting together, BSing a little bit, kind of introducing ourselves to you, the listeners. And I hope that was helpful. But we got a great guest for you for our first episode. Rob and I both worked for Congressman Bob Ney. That's where we really got our career started in politics. Unfortunately, Cory can't be with us tonight. Cory had a death in the family, and he couldn't be here to record this, but Cory was a part of that interview that we are going to have for you today with our first episode. Rob, how do you think that went with Bob for our first?
I think it was great. I mean, it reminded me of just having dinner with him on a normal day. You know, it's funny, you can go years without seeing somebody or even talking to them, and it's like no time had passed at all from the early 2000s.
What I found interesting is like he's changed a lot in some ways. I mean, he was an alcoholic. He had some serious problems going on in his life when he was in Congress. He seems to be very much at peace with who he is, what he's doing with his life. He's been sober now for almost 17 years, which is mind-blowing. It's also mind-blowing to know it's been that long since we worked for Bob. But boy, the stories were great. I mean, we talked to him for over 90 minutes. And the truth is we probably need to get back together with him because there was probably 90 minutes more worth of content that we didn't even get to. You know, I was thinking freedom.
Yeah,
I mean, 9/11, the Iraq War, we barely touched on. I mean, there's so much.
Well, we both work professionally in politics on different sides. And you know as well as I do that when you're campaigning against somebody, trying to win a race, it's easy to turn your opponents into two-dimensional cartoons and to make their entire life revolve around one mistake or one accident. And with Bob Ney, and I hope it comes out in this interview, I personally judge him based on the totality of his life and all the good things he's done, not just for you and for me, but for thousands of people in the Ohio Valley, for people all around the country that he served with distinction. He's one of the most generous, decent people I've ever met. He made a big mistake, and he paid dearly for it. And he knows that, and he talks about it in our interview. But it just goes to show that this is a tough business. It's easy to make enemies, and the people only get a filtered view of who a journalist or other politicians think you are.
That's right.
And with Bob, we both know, going back to the 90s, what type of person he is and what he's all about. And so I think his mistakes have only made him a more well-rounded, stronger person, at peace with himself. He's learned from them. He's paid his debts. And he was my friend before all of this, and he'll be my friend after it.
Absolutely. And I think the listeners are going to have a great time with this episode, and look forward to you guys hearing it. But before we get into that, this is coming out. This episode's being released the day before the greatest golf tournament of the year. I think we can all agree that the Masters is the greatest golf tournament of the year. And Cory, like I said, couldn't be here because of a death in the family, but he has picked Rory McIlroy to win. We are hosting a contest. So for all of our listeners and anybody following us on social media, all you have to do is go on either Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X and pick a winner. And if you pick the winner, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a dozen Titleist golf balls of your choice. I'm going with Bryson DeChambeau. Rob, who do you got?
I've got Jordan Spieth. I like the way he plays Augusta. Yeah. Not the best ball striker, but from 100 yards and in, he can get up and down from a bucket. If he gets it going, he's going to be tough to beat.
Absolutely. I think all three of those picks are good. Really, we all took the harder pick, as the easy pick would be Scotty Scheffler. And we posted this on social media about an hour ago, and already had multiple people picking Scotty Scheffler. So I'm looking at the odds. He's a 15% chance of winning the Masters according to Data Golf. He's only plus 400 in the betting odds. So really, top five, according to Data Golf, the top five golfers with the best chance to win at Augusta are Scotty Scheffler, Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, Jon Rahm, and Hideki Matsuyama. And in the betting market, Jordan Spieth and Hideki Matsuyama, same odds to win the Masters. So I guess I'm the one going with a long shot with Bryson, but I had to pick a live player. And I love the way Bryson bombs it all over the place. And it's just a matter of time before he has another dominant
You
tournament like he
you
did for the U.S.
you
Open.
would pick a live player. I of course don't watch them. I don't even know if I get that channel.
Oh, you can
Not
watch it on
not
your phone. You don't even need a channel. I like watching it on the app the best.
not a big live guy. Bryson's obviously a hell of a player. I haven't seen him play in a while, so I don't know how he's doing right now, which is always really important going into a major. What's your track record going into it? Augusta is one of those rare places that if you have experience there, it helps you.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Bernard Longer a couple years ago in his 60s.
That's right.
Make a run up the leaderboard. Jack made a run up the leaderboard in his 50s.
It was 1998, the year O'Mara won. So the year after Tiger, Jack would have been, I don't know, 56, 57 years old.
Yeah.
I was playing golf at Woodview Golf Course and ended up stopping my round to watch Jack because, I mean, I think he was like 2 shots off the lead going into 16. It was just absolutely incredible.
He was right there. Freddie still plays well.
Right,
I mean, I have no idea what to expect from Tiger. He's obviously going to get some attention. If he gets it going, look out. As long as he can walk the course. My only concern with Scotty is that, we all know he's one of the best ball strikers in the world right now, which helps you anywhere. But he switched putters. He's had some tournaments where he got hot with a new mallet putter. Other tournaments where, he easily could have won, but the putter was shaky. Augusta National is not the place where you want to go find confidence with the putter.
That's right.
You better have it going in. And that's my only holdup on Scotty. I would not be surprised if he wins. I'd love to see Rory win and complete the Grand Slam. I just think I just have a gut feeling on Jordan this week.
That's good. I think it's a good gut feeling. And obviously the odds makers find him in the top 5 best chances to win. So I think that's a great pick. If you had to pick your greatest Masters moment, greatest shot that you ever witnessed, and let's not talk about like Jack in 1986, because I mean, I was 5 years old or 4 years old, and you were probably 2, so we don't remember that.
Yeah.
But in our lifetime of actually watching the Masters, what's your greatest moment that you remember?
I gotta go Tiger behind the 16th green, the famous Nike swoosh wedge shot. That's the first one.
How much money was that worth to Nike when that ball sat right on the edge?
I mean, I can't imagine what it would be worth today. But just an incredible golf shot, iconic, straight out of a motion picture. I mean, you think about Augusta National and Tiger Woods, that's probably the shot. What about you?
I mean, it's hard not to say Tiger, but I think Mickelson on 13 in 2010, out of the pine straw. I've always been a big Mickelson fan. I love Tiger. I just love golf in general, and I really don't dislike anybody. I just think that everybody brings something to the table. I love watching the best players in the world battle against each other. I was glad that Augusta National invited Waco Neiman this year because, I mean, his form is unbelievable right now. According to Data Golf, he's the 7th best player in the world, even though he's outside of the top 50 in the official World Golf rankings. I'd like to see Louis Oosthuizen in the field this week, and Dean Burmester and Taylor Gooch, also from Live. I mean, I know they knew what was happening when they went to Live, so nobody feels bad for them. But they're all in the top 50 in the world, clearly. And I always liked Louis. I mean, another great memory, I remember Louis having an Albatross in number 2 about 10 or 15 years ago, which is just incredible. I've still never had an Albatross in my life. So
I have one. I cupped a 3-wood from 251 yards at Raspberry Falls in Virginia.
That's great.
And I saw it tracking up toward the pin over a little ridge. I got up and there was no ball on the green. So I actually checked behind the green first because I figured it had run through. And then my buddy looked in the cup and it was in there.
Amazing.
Yep.
I was playing this weekend. We had 25-mile-an-hour wind on Saturday in Tulsa with gust up to 40. So it makes some of those holes really hard, but it makes some of them fun. And I hit a bomb on the 13th hole at my club, which is about a 515-yard par 5. And I hit it 385 down the middle and just smoked it and got caught the 40-mile-an-hour gust, and I'm sitting there 120 out with a sand wedge in my hand, and all I got to do is just fly it up there. And I told my playing partner, I said, I've never had an albatross, and I get chances like this from time to time with a mid-iron or a wedge in my hand on a par 5. It's got to happen someday. I proceeded to lay the sod and hit it 60 yards, then bladed it onto the back of the green and got lucky to 2-putt from 60 feet. So anyway, I'd love to have an albatross someday. That's kind of one of my top goals. But
what is your biggest Masters collapse memory?
Oh, Greg Norman when I was a kid. Greg Norman just absolutely melted down against Faudo. Jordan Spieth had a pretty good meltdown when he was trying to repeat.
Rory had one on 11 or on 10.
Yeah. But man, Greg Norman, I think it was 96. Yeah. He was the number 1 player in the world and just completely fell apart on Sunday. And we always talk about Norman collapsing, but Faudo also shot 67, which was incredible. So can't take that away from Sir Nick. But I'm looking forward to this weekend. Major championships are something special. I love to watch golf, but I'd rather play golf most weeks, but not this weekend. I'll make sure I'm watching, especially Sunday afternoons, the best theater in sports.
I have a tournament on Saturday at RTJ, so I'm gonna play in that, but I'll be watching Thursday and Friday and Sunday.
Well, great. Without further ado, we're going to give you the Bob Ney interview. Bob Ney has been a huge part of all of our stories getting involved in politics. He was our hometown congressman. Even though Cory and I lived on the other side of the river, Bob Ney was our congressman. He was the person that stood up for the industry in our neck of the woods. He was the one that was on the news. He was a hero of ours, and we are just so thrilled to have Bob Ney with us, former congressman, the former mayor of Capitol Hill. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you both. Wow. Neither one of you have aged. What's your secret?
Well, no, let's I think I have aged. This is 2002. A little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
You've lost a few pounds since then, though, that's for sure.
I have my own example. Again. And in this, the day after you stepped down, your nameplate was still in the dais. And so I grabbed it to make sure it didn't get in the wrong hands. And if you ever want this back, I will open it up and send it to you. But I figured it needed to be in good hands.
That.
Mr. Ney, chairman.
It is. It's in good hands.
Well, Bob, why don't you?
I'm so happy to
Bob,
be on with you.
We got Cory Toth here as well, and I don't know if you remember, Cory's from Follinsby, and and he started working for Shelley Moore Capito, and then worked for Bob Latta. Now he's a lobbyist and doing a great job. So why don't you just start with telling our audience a little bit about yourself? You've been out of office since 2006, so a lot of people don't even maybe know the story. So just bird's eye view about your career in Congress.
Okay. Well, in first grade, I'm just kidding. I'm from the Ohio Valley, where you guys are from, both of you, and all three of you. So I'm from the Ohio Valley and went to 2 years to Ohio University Eastern Branch, but that's where I got started in politics. By accident, we were on our way to St. John's Church in Blair, Ohio, my mother, my father, and I, and he turned the radio on, and the news story was about the current governor at the time, John Gilligan, and it said that if you went to law school, Gilligan, because there was a state money crisis, wanted the people to pay back the state's share of per diem, sort of, that the state puts in for students. I didn't like that. Now, I was like every other great person from the Ohio Valley. I was from a Democrat family. You know, the whole Ohio Valley was Democrat. And so I went to church, and Don Polito, who is alive, by the way, he's 101 up in Columbus, was a friend of my father's. And Dom said, look, what are you going to do next year? And I said, well, I'm going to go to Ohio University and then eventually, after 4 years, go to law school. And he said, well, you need a recommendation. So get involved in politics. You can work for Jim Rhodes, who was our longtime governor and fought a constitutional issue to come back and run again. And everybody predicted Rhodes would not ever make it because he was the Kent State governor. He sent the troops in
to Kent State, okay? And everybody knows what Kent State was about. So I remember what I said to Dom. Well, Rhodes is a Republican, isn't he? And here's how Dom answered. He doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, rich or poor. If you believe in him, work for him. I said, okay, but I won't register Republican. We laugh about that today. So I got involved with the college Republicans. There was a real skinny guy with a 28-inch waist, hair parted in the middle, named Karl Rove. And he came in, and from Arkansas, he had gotten elected. And then I was in college Republicans with Roger Wicker. You know that name. Phil English is no longer in the House, but Roger Wicker and some others. We were in college Republicans together. So I went up to Toledo, Ohio. I didn't know what I was doing. They just said, show up. They said, you're going to be chairman of college Republicans. I'm like, what do you do? They said, just relax. You're going to be chairman. So they threw this party, and I became chairman of college Republicans. Then they made me a delegate when I was about 19 for Rhodes because I was an at-large. Oh, we call them super delegates now. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we had them way back then because Rhodes said to me, you can do whatever you want, but you're going to vote for Gerald Ford. I'm like, okay, I don't care.
I mean, that's the last
good.
time the Republicans
over Ronald
had a
Reagan
convention, right? It was 1976.
Right. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, Matt, about
hey,
the Reagan thing.
I get it.
I voted for Gerald Ford. So ended up, I got involved with politics all through college. Then I went ahead and took a break after I graduated, and I moved to Iran. And then the revolution of the Shah started, so I came back from Iran. And when I came back, a guy named Arnie Kleebone, who's alive from Youngstown, Ohio, I worked with him in the Appalachia program, said, hey, while you were gone, your former Congressman Wayne Hayes won a state rep seat. He had a sex scandal, and he resigned. He was chairman of House Administration. You all know what that committee is. So he came back to Ohio Valley. They loved him. They put him back in. And Arnie said, he can't be beat. He's never been beaten. Even after the scandal, he came back and got elected state rep. And I said to Arnie, I can beat him. And he said, no, you can't. You don't have any money. The district is 3% Republican. He said, you can't beat Hayes. So I quit my job and I went down and I beat Hayes with a great, I couldn't do it today. You didn't have to have any money. We knocked on 28,000 doors. Just ran a massive grassroots campaign.
Let me ask a question.
And then
was there or was there not
Yeah.
a suspect poll that helped the Republican Party believe in you? Was there a poll that might have been done with a little bit of alcohol with the callers?
Yeah, actually, I forgot that part of the story. I can name you names too now. Nobody believed we could beat Hayes. We were, I think, about, 14 points down or whatever we were, 12 points down. So they said they would send a guy in named Felix Katina from the Republican National Committee. They would do one survey. Now, in those days, because I'm old, there were no cell phones. So we had to get volunteers, and in their house, that was the polling place with the telephones. And Felix had to go from Bridgeport to Shadyside, all these little towns, and make sure that this was being done legitimately. We took him to an Italian house. His name was Katina. And we took him to an Italian house, and they spoke Italian with him. He could actually speak Italian. And they gave him Frangelica and got him pretty loaded, real loaded. And so he really couldn't complete all. And I've never told this story except to you. He couldn't complete verifying that this was legitimate. And what I didn't know was that by the time they brought him to this little party we had in Neves, Ohio, and he was real loaded by that time, I found out that gave friends of mine, real good friend of mine, Bob Wallace, he's retired from the police department, so I can say this, enough time to change the survey to make me 2 points ahead of Hayes. So I got a phone call one day, and they said, Bill Brock, who used to be Senator Brock, wants to meet you up at the Hyatt in Columbus outside. He doesn't have much time. Go up and say hi to him. And he said, look, we'd love to get Hayes. We didn't think you could win, but the polls look good. We're going to give you $10,000. which is
Oh yeah.
$150,000 today, $10,000, and we beat Wayne Hayes barely, but
Well, Bob, you were
we beat him.
real quick.
Then
Can I interrupt
I
for a second?
didn't
So,
believe.
1980, you beat Wayne Hayes. Then 1982, you lose.
Yes.
You were just in the newspaper
Yes.
last week with the guy that beat you in 1982. Oh, do we lose Bob here? Oh, you still there? We lost your video
Yeah.
feed. All right. So you
Yes,
lose
I'm
in
here.
1982 to Jack Serra. Is that correct? And now you guys
Yes.
still today talking about a project that should have been taken care of years ago, all over the newspaper. It was a long article in the Wheeling Intel this past weekend. So
Yeah. And we agreed with each other too. He was a Democrat. He's the guy that beat me. So I decided I didn't need to spend money to get reelected. People knew the job I did. So I lost to Jack Serra by 126 votes. Now, after that, I decided I needed to get involved with lobbyists and fundraising. That was my convince me moment. So I lost, and I did what you would naturally do when you lose. I moved to Saudi Arabia.
Naturally. Everybody from the Ohio Valley is moving to Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's really normal for Valley boys like us. Yeah.
Yeah, we all do it. We move to Saudi Arabia, Well, usually we move to West Virginia. That's a foreign country, but
That's worse.
I settled on Saudi Arabia. So I went to Saudi Arabia, and I got a phone call, and in fact, it was Neil Clark. He unfortunately died a couple years ago, had killed himself down in Florida. Neil said, hey, they want you to come back. Sam Speck was the state senator. He got appointed by Reagan. You need to come back. And I said, no, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to get rich. I don't want to come back. I lost an election. He said, come back. I said, no. So they had 5 guys into the appointment process. I flew back. In fact, I didn't even tell my wife. I surprised her, and she was pregnant with our first child, Bobby. She almost gave birth that night because I show up from Saudi Arabia. I told her I'm not coming back. I show up. The next morning, I go down. I fight the 5 guys to get the appointment, and they asked me a question. Paul Gilmore, the late Paul Gilmore, former congressman, and he said, if you don't win this, our selection to make you appointed state senator, what are you going to do? You're going to support our choice? I said, no, I just flew over from Saudi Arabia, gave up a lot of money. I'm going to run against your choice and defeat them. That's what I'm going to do. So I got the appointment. Then I won a primary, and then I had a very fierce election. Kind of funny. The newspapers wrote us up. Bob Alexo was a Democrat, popular county commissioner in Belmont County, who later worked for House administration. We hired everybody I ran against, I think. And so Alexo was a tough candidate. And we got slammed because I think between Bob and I, we spent like $70,000. And they talked about how disgraceful this was. How could you spend this money? So to try to wrap this up, Bob Bennett, the late chairman of the Ohio Republican Party, was after me. He said, you got to run. Doug Applegate may be beatable. So they did polling and showed that I could potentially beat Applegate. He had soft support. Well, then Dave Hobson, former congressman who's retired now, called me up and said, don't announce against Applegate. He's going to quit. Because I was going to run against Applegate. And Applegate quit. And then we had this primary, which my campaign manager was Congressman Mike Cory. You know that name. He was a wonderful campaign manager. And my finance director was Dave DiStefano, who just came off the successful Marino campaign. And they put a team together, and we had a fierce election. I was the first Republican, I think, in 55 years. We won the seat. I originally wasn't going to run for it, but Bob Bennett said, hey, I want you to talk to Newt Gingrich, the minority leader. And I said, why? I'm not going to run. He said, well, go out and tell him no. I said, why would I do that? He said, because I promised Newt you would come out. And I said, well, unpromise him. So I went out, Dave DiStefano and I said, well, Dave, we'll just, get this meeting over with, 10 minutes. An hour later, I'm like, yes, Newt, I'll run to save America. Yes. and I
Follow up
ran,
on that.
and
Let me follow
we
up on
had
that
the
because
contract with America
you
class.
you've told me this story before that you went out there to say no. What was it about Newt Gingrich that inspired you to say, yeah, I'm going to run for this? Because I mean, let's be honest, you were giving up. There was no term limits in Ohio at the time. You were a very powerful finance chairman in the Ohio Senate. I know you enjoyed that job a lot. So, what was it about Newt specifically that said that the light bulb went off and said, "Yeah, I'm running for Congress"?
I had people in and out of my office before that saying, "You got to run. You have to run. You can be a congressman." I said, "Big deal. The only one who wants me to be a congressman is my mother." They said, "Well, you'll have a great pension." I said, "No, if I stay in the state Senate." I was making $68,000 as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee way back then. I said, "If I stay in the state Senate, my pension will be better. You can travel." Ironically, I got in trouble over travel. I said, I've already traveled. And they said, "Well, you can have power." I said, "I've got power within the state. I want to run for governor." All these people told me these things, right? And they were congressmen. I go out to Newt Gingrich and we sit there and he said, "Look, I want to do this. I want to solve world cancer. I want to,"
Yeah.
you know, what? It's Newt. He was brain farting, and he said, "We've got this contract. Some call it a contract on America, contract with America." And he said, "We're going to do this and that and this." And he said, "Here's the bottom line. We have 19 seats we can't win. Yours is one of them. If you tell me yes today, I have to find 18 more people to take the window of opportunity to save the United States of America." I'm like,
That's amazing.
"I'm in." And DeStefano looked at me. We went outside. He's like, "What did you do?" Because I told him, I'll tell him no. I said, "Well, I kind of changed my mind." He said, "What are we going to do now?" And I said, "Get drunk."
Well, let's just pause it right there. 1994, you run for office and you win. We're going to come back to that. Cory, Rob, why don't you each just let's all three of us just say how we met Bob, when we met Bob, and what kind of impact it had on us, and we'll move on from there.
I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I met you, you came to Indian Creek Middle School in 1998. 1998.
Wow.
And I forget why you were even there. It might have been to like dedicate a flagpole, something innocuous. But CNN came because it was during the Clinton impeachment vote. And I don't think you had declared your vote yet. And so you were speaking to
Right.
my eighth grade, the entire eighth grade and seventh grade classes in the gymnasium. And the other students were asking you, basic questions. Do you like being a congressman? And what's your life like? And what do you think of this or that? And I stood up and I had read that you were going through a divorce. And I asked you, as you're going through a personal situation, do you take that into account before making a decision about President Clinton's impeachment? I forget exactly how I phrased it, but it really put you on the spot. And the CNN cameras were there,
Of course.
and you paused. And for the only time I've ever seen in your life, you paused and you said, I don't know. And then you were there with your team and they left. And then later that night, I ran into you I think it was at Naples or one of the Italian local restaurant. And I came up and said hello to you, and you recognized me and said, "You little shit." And
Yeah.
I would have been 14.
How old were you?
And then fast forward
Wow.
5 years later, I got an internship for the summer through Miami University with Boehner. And so I was interning for Boehner.
Yeah. Right.
I saw you that summer. I introduced myself. You said, "If you ever need anything, let me know," which is the worst thing to ever say to me because I will remember. And I came back to DC that winter with the president of Miami of Ohio and their lobbyist. And I mentioned to you that I really wanted to be a White House intern. And so I'm going on and on about what I want to do and, all this bullshit. and you were just looking down at your BlackBerry typing, and I didn't even think you were listening to me. And then at the end of the meeting, you held up your BlackBerry, and it said, I could see, to Carl Rove, please hire Rob Ellsworth as an intern this summer. You owe me one, Ney. And it was the coolest thing that had ever happened to me. And so I got a call from Barry Jackson at the White House, who was Rove's top aide or chief of staff. And he got me all set up. And so I'm getting ready to do my White House internship for the summer. And about 2 months before I left, you called me on my cell phone to check and see how I was doing and how it was going. And you said, hey, I know it's an unpaid internship and a lot of kids from the Valley have trouble affording housing and just living in DC for the summer, because back then you didn't pay interns. No one did. And I was certainly in that boat of it being too expensive to come here for the summer. And you said, well, instead of being an intern, why don't you come work as a staff assistant on my committee that I'm chairman of? I'll pay you. You'll get more experience. You've already done an internship, so we'll give you more work. And so I talked to my advisor, and he said, lots of people have been interns. I don't know of any other 19-year-olds who've been staffers. You call the chairman back and say yes. And so I did that day. And on my first day as a staff assistant at House Administration, you emailed me and said, I hear you're a good writer. I'm going to give a speech on the House floor today attacking Michael Isikoff, because Isikoff had just written a story in Afghanistan where he accused one of our troops or multiple of our troops of flushing a Koran down or desecrating a Koran. And you said, I really want to go down and give a passionate speech on this. So I'd never written a speech for a politician before. So I start going through this thing and I'm like, let's light the bastard up. I mean, let's light him up. So I put a line in there that said, Mr. Isikoff's actions were not merely unfortunate, they should be illegal, or they are illegal. And I thought for sure, once it ran through the chain of command, somebody would cross that line out, or you would cross the line out. And then all of a sudden I see you go down on the floor I'm watching the TV in the House admin office, and you give the speech and delivered the line. And in every paper the next morning, your picture and that line was there. And that was my first, exposure to Washington politics. And it's something that, I never would have had a chance to do for years, but you jump-started my career, no doubt about it. I know Matt feels the same way.
And one thing about you, amongst your other good qualities, Rob, is that you are an amazing speechwriter. And the second thing is that Isikoff has never forgiven me. He freaked out over that floor talk. Literally, I knew from friends of mine that are friends of his, he went wild over it. So you had an impact.
That was a blast. And I mean, really, it's one of the reasons I always encourage young people, especially from the Valley, to go work in politics for a while, work on a campaign, work in Congress. Because if you get a good boss and you get somebody that sort of empowers you to do new things and take chances, then, you really do get to make an impact and make an influence.
Right.
I point to that first speech, but I really can think of, countless other things we did on the committee or that we did in your personal office to help folks at home. One of those really that I think to this day is the most unique is how many kids you took on the House floor.
We took 25% of all tours of the U.S. House side. That was our office. We had 25%.
Wow. It was incredible. And I think that beyond it being the right thing to do, very few members of Congress do anything. I don't think anywhere near that. But I also see the political upside in that too, because I remember coming to Capitol Hill in seventh grade, and I didn't meet you. I think you were you might have been in office then. I'm not sure, but if you met your congressman and he showed you around the Capitol, you're going to go home and tell your parents, "Oh,
Sure.
that Congressman Ney, he's the best." And you can get votes that way too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
But I really liked the part of the kids. And over the years, it's been amazing where I've went and people have said, "Oh yeah, when I was in sixth grade, you took me on the floor of the house." It's really been neat to see the impact it helped the kids.
Absolutely.
I want to come back to school tours because I think there's something interesting for us to talk about with current events. So I want to come back to that. Cory, when did you meet Bob? And I think it's an interesting story here. It's a little different than Rob and I's meeting Bob.
So actually, I think there's two parts of the story. I think we met when I was a kid growing up because my uncle helped run convenient food stores.
Oh yeah.
His name was Greg DeSantis.
Oh yeah.
And then his brother Jay ran a sled down out of
Right.
Wheeling.
Right.
So, but I was just a kid. The better story of the two is I think I met you through Matt. We were at either the Cracked Claw up near Frederick or out at Buffalo Wild Wings in St.
Probably both.
Yeah.
Fun times. But I have a lot I can say about my working with Bob. It's kind of similar path to Rob's, but it all started with Bob calling me on my cell phone, which this is, that was the first cell phone I ever had. I didn't have a cell phone in high school. I got a cell phone when I was about to become a White House intern. I became a White House intern through a different way, but you happen to sit next to my uncle at a Filipino doctor dinner.
Yeah.
Of all things. So my uncle's really good friends with this Filipino doctor named Ren Dela Cruz. They're still great friends today. He's Bob's neighbor. He gets some award from the Filipino Doctors Association.
Right.
And you're a member of Congress, one of the most powerful members of Congress, and you're showing up at a Filipino doctor's dinner for your friend. And you and my uncle are probably the only two white guys there in the whole group. We just you sit there talking, and he says, my nephew's going to be a White House intern. He's leaving for D.C. in a couple days. And you said, well, I'd love to meet him and let him know I could help him in any way. The first phone call I ever received on my cell phone was from Congressman. I get this call from a block number, actually. And I pick it up. I'm like, hello. And he's like, Matt, this is Bob Ney. And I'm like, what on earth? Because my uncle didn't even tell me that he had met you. And you said, I met your uncle last night. He says great things about you. You're going to be a White House intern. If there's anything I can do for you in Washington, you let me know. And I said, well, Congressman, I said, I applied for an internship in your office last semester, and I never even heard back. I never even got a return phone call. So I'm thrilled to get this call. And I said, let me ask you a weird question. You live in St. Clairsville, right? And he said, yes,
remember.
Yeah, I do. I said, my car is actually kind of a piece of junk.
This was gutsy. Was gutsy.
I said, my car is kind of a piece of junk, but it's all I can afford. I said, I'm going to work hard at the White House, but I've got a very serious girlfriend that she's from St. Clairsville. And I go to Marietta College. And I said, do you drive back and forth from Washington or do you fly? He goes, I drive about 75% of the time. I said, well, if I could ever get a ride with you, that would be amazing because my car, I'm not sure it can make it over 68 very many times. And he says, yeah, just call my office anytime. Be happy to give you a ride. So it's President or Martin Luther King weekend or President Day weekend. I can't remember which one. And so I called the office and I said, I'd like to talk to Congressman Ney. And they're like, who are you? And I explained who I am. And they're like, well, what do you need? I said, well, the congressman told me if I ever needed a ride back to the Ohio Valley, just to give him a call. And I'd like to go back for the break. And I come to find out later that the staff thought I was a crazy person. They weren't even going to give the message to Bob, and that it ended up elevating up to Will Heaton, who was your executive assistant at the time. And I think Neil was still your chief of staff. And Will got the message and he's like, thought it was weird and bizarre. And he showed it to you and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that young guy. Like, yeah, I'll give him a ride. Just tell him to be here at the office. So I just show up at the office and I got a full suit on and Bob's like, all right, we're going back. Are you going to wear that suit the whole time? It's like, oh, we're getting into comfortable clothes, so we start driving back. We get into his Lincoln Town car and he puts on, who was the rapper? Baller Shot Call. Lil Troy. He puts Lil Troy on and he's like jamming, smoking Salem Lights like a chimney on the front seat. And I said, this guy's a little different than I expected.
Troy saved my life a couple of times in prison.
And he pretty much offered me a job on that trip, which was crazy, and the rest is history. So
Yeah.
a lot of other stories I could tell, but it was definitely not the normal way of getting a job on Capitol Hill. I can promise you
Well,
that.
I'll tell you, you all were great. I was just talking to Deb Akers, and
Oh,
yeah, and you all know her. She knows you. She asked. I told her I was going to do this show, but people still talk about y'all, and because you did a lot of good things. I always tell people they have this, if you take the entire time that I knew Jack Abramoff, the lobbyist, and you consolidate it into a time period, it would probably equal 5 weeks, maybe, that I spent, a total of my lifetime, with Abramoff. But I tell people that our office did so many things for so many people, the district office, the House administration, uh, House administration alone for putting up with members and their spouses
oh, wow,
needed a
yeah.
Congressional Medal of Honor.
Before we release this part of the interview, let's talk about Jack Abramoff and who he was. I mean, he was Rob Wright. I mean, the best lobbyist in D.C. by a lot of people's standards. Maybe not the best, but most notorious.
Notorious.
If you wanted want to get
Effective.
things done, you went to Jack Abramoff, and he obviously cut tons of corners, did tons of things unethically, and really brought a lot of shame, in my opinion, on the whole lobbying industry. So again, I'm not saying that Bob Ney is blameless in all of his actions, or some of the other people that were caught up in that scandal are blameless, but Jack was the most corrupt of all of them. I mean, some of the things he did were absolutely duplicitous.
Well, and the scale really is what's incredible about he did. I mean, his lobbying fees were in the tens of millions of dollars. I mean, there were various tribes that paid him 50, 60, 70 million dollars in fees. And if someone's paying you that much, they expect you to win. And there were a lot of people around Jack who were benefiting from that in different organizations. So he was finding ways to get one tribe that, say, wanted to open a casino to pay him, millions of dollars. And then he would go get his friends that worked in different interest groups to promote their cause. They would get paid, sky high fees. And then they would find ways to go to the competing company or Indian tribe or whatever it was and get them to pay on the other side. So they were working both sides of issues, getting paid exorbitant fees, which in and of itself is not illegal. But what was illegal is they had what they called I don't know if it was the Favor Factory or the Gimme Five program, where they were essentially running favors through congressional offices and with government officials. It could be renting out boxes at sporting events, the Super Bowl, the World Series, etc., chartering private jets to play fancy golf courses, all in hopes of getting language inserted into bills before the Congress. And that's where it crosses the line. And it drew a lot of attention. In 2004 through 2006, Jack Abramoff was the biggest story in Washington, D.C., and the connections were broad. It was Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate. It went all the way up to the White House, where huge campaign contributions would go into the Bush-Cheney reelect, and whatever head of state Jack Abramoff was representing, would somehow get high-level meetings at the White House, or would get a state dinner, or they tried to get state dinners. And not accusing President Bush personally of having done any of this, I don't know. But it all sort of came to light in committee hearings that John McCain was chairing. And it was payback because Jack Abramoff had supported George W. Bush in the 2000 primary against McCain. And so McCain had his eyes on Jack. He started investigating it. Once the lid came off, they pretty soon realized that even their friends were involved in this. Yeah. There were, like I said, both parties, both chambers of Congress.
One, Bob was not convicted of any crime dealing with the Abramoff scandal. It's kind of two separate things. It's what got the FBI looking into Bob, and they found other things that that he ended up pleading guilty for. He actually never pled guilty to any kind of bribe with Jack Abramoff or anything connected with that separate investigation, really. And I think about Abramoff. I mean, it's kind of the perfect racketeering example. I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was just an absolute racket. And if someone now actually live on an Indian reservation, I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which according to the McGirt decision, the reservations here in Northeast Oklahoma, or actually all of Oklahoma, Eastern Oklahoma, have never been disestablished. So I live on a reservation. The tribal nations in our state are incredible partners and people. And my neighbor across the street is Osage. My neighbor next door is Cherokee. And when you start thinking about just how duplicitous that was to take advantage of these tribes that were trying to get resources after all they've been through their history, it just even hits harder now thinking back on that, knowing just how terrible it was.
Well, and they wanted to get a casino license or open a casino or get federal funding for their reservation, and they were basically sold a bill of goods. And like you said, Bob wasn't charged for a lobbying violation. Neither was Jack Abramoff. I mean, they went down for Jack went down for wire fraud and embezzlement and mail fraud. This is an interesting fact. Nobody has ever been convicted on an LDA Lobbying Disclosure Act violation. Not even Jack Abramoff. And the reason is kind of a sad one, actually. It's that it's not illegal to give politicians campaigns money. It's illegal to give them money personally. But as we talked a little bit in our first episode 0, if you will, it is not illegal for a lobbyist. It is illegal for a lobbyist to take a congressman or staffer golfing, unless you put checks in an envelope and call it a fundraiser. That's the truth, and it's one of these silly provisions in our campaign finance laws that, I can't take you golfing unless I give you money. I mean, how's that
Well,
make any
hopefully
sense?
our listeners now know a little more about Jack Abramoff, and some of this will make a little more sense. I've got a lot of notes here and things that we can cover, but honestly, it's just going to go on and on because there's so much to cover. But the show is golf and politics. So you brought up Jack Abramoff. It's probably good we just dive right into it. And the reason you're our first guest, let's talk about St. Andrews. I mean, this is the trip that led to the investigation that ended your career. Give us a 50,000-foot view of the circumstances, how that came together.
This was the implosion. But what's interesting, you were asking me to tell the listeners, my history, and I stopped with getting elected to Congress. It went a tiny bit beyond that. Newt Gingrich called me 30 days into me serving in the U.S. House, and he said, how would you like to be the vice chairman of House Administration, the first person in your class to be a vice chairman, 30 days in office? And I said, well, Vern Ehlers, he's deceased now. Of course, you all know him. I said, Vern Ehlers is the vice chairman. And Newt's like, don't worry about that. Stop it. Do you want to be vice chairman or not? And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, I'll take care of Ehlers. Don't worry about it. So he made me vice chairman, lining me up to be the first person in my class, which I was, to be chairman of House Administration, So I became very close to Newt. And then I wanted to be chairman of the Housing Subcommittee. And he had a meeting, and it was between me and somebody else. And I'm telling this story for a reason. Tom DeLay, the whip, did not want me, and told me to my face, did not want me to be chairman of the Housing Subcommittee. I was also chairman of House Administration, which you could be a subcommittee chairman because you get wavered by the speaker on that committee. Anyway, it was between me and another person. So I controlled, amongst, federal election law, as you all know, Smithsonian, Library of Congress. House Administration has a lot of really intense and really substantive things that it does. But it does members' drapes and carpet and everything to do with the house cafeterias and the restaurants. So anyway, I'm sitting there and I Newt had a special meal brought up for himself. We were in the speaker's office with about 10 people for a meeting, and Newt is opening his sandwich and things. And as he moves his plate, there's a sticker on there that I had one of the House employees put on there, and it said, "You need to make Bob Ney chairman of the housing subcommittee."
Wow.
And he just stops and he looks at me, and he never explained this to the group. And he went, "Ney, you're scary." That's what he said to me. Anyway, he made me chairman of the housing subcommittee. So my path was set. I was on transportation committee too. And so my path was pretty set. And then some people came to me and said, you need to be speaker of the House, and we can put together this, kitchen cabinet. But you have one obstacle in your way, Tom DeLay of Texas. I was a squishy Republican, pro-labor Republican, and we had about 50 of us. One of them talked about you so many times, Matt, Steve LaTourette, the late congressman, because Matt took him around D.C. and he missed his event. Matt didn't know where he was driving to. Yeah. LaTourette had a sense of humor. But anyway, they said that, my labor issues, supporting labor, although I was conservative on immigration, conservative on the budget and everything, it was a problem. And we needed to neutralize Tom DeLay. And somebody said the way to get close to Tom DeLay is to get close to the closest person to him. And I said, who is that? And they said, Jack Abramoff. I had never met him. So that started the entire deal. And then I met Jack Abramoff, and we hung out at Signatures. He was smart. He opened a restaurant like Haley Barbour did too, but Jack opened a restaurant, and all the White House came there. He was very close to Karl Rove and the Bush people.
I learned how to use chopsticks at Signatures.
There you go.
And I never forget you telling me we were at the first dinner. I'm 20 years old at this dinner. Like, what the hell am I doing with all these powerful people at this dinner? And you said, just always feel free to order anything you want off the menu. Don't you ever worry about it. Just order what you want. And you can tell on my face, like I'm looking at prices, just freaking out,
So I met Jack, and then we had the fatal, which they tried to make this fatal for you, Matt. We had the fatal trip to Scotland. Now, interestingly enough, one of my people nixed you going, which is probably the greatest thing that ever happened to you.
All Rob, I got out of the deal.
Neither one of you were on the trip.
All right, so Bob Ney really sucked at golf. I mean, it wasn't like he was just a hacker. I mean, he literally had no skill when it came to the game. He didn't really have patience for it either. If you knew him, you knew he was always on the phone. He was a wheeling, dealing politician. So, I mean, he was constantly working his BlackBerry in one hand and cell phone in the other. I remember when he got a Bluetooth headset for the first time when that came out, he thought that was the greatest invention ever. So I would take him down to Ogleby Park. We went to Spidell and we went to Crispin multiple times. And I would take him out golfing, and he never could even finish a hole. I don't think he ever finished a hole and actually hold the ball out. And most of the time, he would start trying to listen, and after one or two swings of it not working, he would just get on the phone, and he was completely checked out. Sometimes he's trying to hit the ball with the phone up to his ear. It was an absolute disaster. And I'm thinking to myself, because I think you have to be a legit 18 handicap to play St. Andrews.
A PGA professional has to send a letter with you to Augusta or to St. Andrews stating that you're an 18 handicap or better.
He would sometimes shoot 18 over on one hole. I mean, it was an utter disaster. So, yeah, he definitely was not somebody seeking out a golf trip. It wasn't something he got enjoyment from. To this day, he thinks, hey, that's good for you that you want to play, but I have no desire to play this game. He was good at racquetball. We used to play racquetball together, and he was, we'd have some good matches and, decently athletic on those things. But when it came to golf, there was no skill there. And I think he references in our interview that Mike Oxley, the former congressman who's passed away, who was a really good golfer in his own right, said it was sacrilegious that he got to go to St. Andrews and play golf.
Of all the people to get in trouble for a golf trip.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. And for those that don't know, for those of you who don't know anything about Bob Ney, is probably one of the most well-traveled members of Congress. I mean, he lived in Iran in the 70s. He lived in Saudi Arabia. He's been all over the world, and he doesn't play golf. But in the media, they portrayed it as Ohio congressman, sells his soul for golf trip and free trip to Scotland. And it's like, the guy didn't need a free trip anywhere. He's been everywhere. And he, like you said, really, really sucks at golf. And
the old course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
St.
trip-
Andrews on the other side.
The trip took place before I started. And
Okay.
I've been asked about this several times. Had I been there, would I have gone on the trip? And the answer is, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would have been maneuvering my way. You would have been opening your sandwich at your desk, and it would have said, "Send Rob."
Thanks,
I would
Rob.
I was so pissed, Rob. Like I can't even tell you. Like it's probably, I mean, if you read Bob's book, Sideswiped, I mean, I've got some stories in there where we were definitely pissed at each other at different times. But this was the first year on the job, and I was a college golfer. I was so incredibly upset that I didn't get to go because I went with Bob everywhere. Like when I became his executive assistant, everywhere he went, I went, and I was there taking notes, and I was his body man. And I remember thinking, like, he's going to take a freaking legislative aide instead of me, like, and he doesn't. None of these guys even golf, like. And I was really mad about it. And I kept begging him, "Is there any way for me to get on this trip?"
Before we move on, I want to thank Bob for the white glove treatment I got in the book.
Thanks.
When I first got my copy, I gave it the old Washington read. I flipped to the back, looked for what pages I was on. I only made a couple pages, but they were all positive. So thank you for.
Not everybody can say that, Rob.
Thank you for not telling the truth.
You were very helpful and friends and encouraging. Now the thing about Scotland was everybody that knew me, and the night before I went, by the way, I had dinner with Mike Oxley, the late Mike Oxley, chairman of the Financial Institutions Committee, and he looked at me at Mitchell's Steakhouse in Columbus, and he said, "It's a sacrilege that you're going to Scotland." He said, "It's a sacrilege." I used to throw fundraisers in the state senate. We even took this to the Justice Department lawyers, and it said, "I don't golf, you can." I hated golf. I didn't golf. In fact, I'll tell you, I got a phone call one day, and it's the day I really wished I could golf. And it was from the White House. Bill Clinton was president. And they said, the president would like you to be in a foursome with him. Now, it was Bill Clinton. I wasn't sure where he was going with that. But anyway, so I said, I don't golf. And I thought, wow, who doesn't want to golf with the president, right? And Clinton was a cool guy. I mean, Clinton's the type of guy, he had a good time making jokes. But I said to the White House, I don't golf. And they said, well, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be good. I said, you don't understand. I would have to throw the ball around the course. I would frustrate the president. I said, so I turned down the golf game. And that got me thinking, man, I should golf. Now, the premise of the government's case is that I asked for a golf trip. Because if I didn't ask for the golf trip, no matter what happened on the trip, no matter how bad it went, it wouldn't have been where I tried to solicit a golf trip. Well, I didn't. And as Matt knows,
let me read this excerpt here.
Okay, yeah.
I remember being mad that I wasn't going on the trip, and then you're like, "Look, Matt, I don't even want to go on this effing trip." Like you were, and I said, "What do you mean you don't want to go? It's St. Andrews." He goes, "I'm a terrible golfer." Here's what I said. He said he didn't want to spend time away. He didn't like to play golf, and he was a lousy golfer. Will Heaton persisted, and eventually Bob decided to go on the trip. I took Bob down to Ogilvy Park in Wheeling, West Virginia, and tried to help him with his swing before the trip, but his golf game was hopeless. I remember jealously thinking what a waste it was for Bob to play St. Andrews because he was such a horrendous golfer.
The caddy, I went to the old course. The first course, you guys are golf enthusiasts. I don't know about you, Cory, but I know Matt and Rob are. And I went to the old course, and the caddy turned to me, and I wish I could do a Scottish brogue, but he turned to me and he said, "Oh, you be the worst I've seen." right to my face. And then I quit golfing a couple of days later. I just totally stopped golfing. It was so bad. If you watch the movie Casino Jack, Kevin Spacey's in the movie, Jeff Pustille plays me. If you watch Casino Jack, at the end of the movie, it's got outtakes sort of me in a sand trap trying to hit the ball out because it got in the sand trap, which those traps are unbelievable. But I got asked to go, and about 3 times I declined it. And as Matt knows, the government didn't believe him. They didn't believe me, and it didn't matter after a period of time. So one thing led to another. Everything imploded. Jack got in trouble over this boat, Sun Cruise. The guy that owned the boat, Gus Bullis, got shot in a gangland type of shooting in his car. I even had one of my relatives call and say, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I have not killed anybody. I didn't." So but all these Murphy Law things went, down. And the bottom line was Alice Fisher, who's up for a job in London right now, by the way. She tried to become Trump's head of FBI. And but Alice also had some motives to pursue the cases. Not that I didn't, that I was a white knight or I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't care. In fact, that was my problem. And I've learned since then, do the right thing when nobody's looking. It doesn't matter what everybody else does. Other people went on golf trips. Other people had baby showers Jack paid for, all these things. But it doesn't matter. You still have to do the right thing yourself. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. And I learned that in prison, too, because we'd have drug dealers who would say, "But I bought softball shirts for the teams. Why didn't they arrest my neighbor? He was selling coke. I was only, selling pot." So you learn that type of thing. But I got embroiled in the whole Abramoff thing, and it just blew up like a mushroom. And Alice Fisher was being criticized by Senator Levin because she had not pursued the Jack Abramoff situation. He called her too close to Tom DeLay's defense team. So bottom line is that, I did some things that weren't right. I didn't file the correct number on my trip. I did file the trip, didn't file the correct number. Ironically, what I was charged with was found unconstitutional 6-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2010. I got out of prison in 2008. So, it was too late for that. But you know what? It doesn't matter. I don't think I could have, put that trial off for 2 to 3 years, which happens in trials. I'm not sure I could have done that and stayed, alive or sane, either one. I had I'm a recovering alcoholic. And so one of the things was sobriety that came out of the whole deal going to prison. But I got involved in something that got completely out of control. And it was really weird because when I got back from the trip, I remember exactly where I was. I was at the Longworth building, the Capitol, crossing to the Longworth building with Will and Paul Vinovich. Will Eaton and Paul Vinovich worked for me. They were both on a trip. And I turned to him, I said, "That was the weirdest trip." Jack vanished for a couple of days. I said it was the weirdest trip. Everything he planned, we sat in our suits waiting for members of Parliament to get there. They didn't show up. I said it was weird. And I remember when one of them turned and said, "Yeah, it's approved by the ethics committee." We were told, and I, like an idiot, didn't verify it. The ethics committee had approved this for DeLay and Tom Feeney from Florida. So I'm like, okay, approved by the ethics committee. If that day I had written woulda, coulda, shoulda, a $5,000 check or $7,000. To this day, if you had a gun to my head, I don't know how much that trip costs because the figures came from Jack. Can I tell you a good, funny story about the trip, by the way?
Absolutely.
Okay. There I am on the plane. I can't golf. And by the way, I think you guys would know this. It was illegal for me to golf there because you have to have a handicap, right?
Right.
Yeah, you have to have your head pro write a letter certifying that you're good
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. My handicap was 200. So I get on the plane and I look, and there's Ralph Reed, who had been head of the Christian Coalition, right? So I'm like, wow, I got to watch my P's and Q's, We get off the plane. They golf right away. He goes, I don't even want to say this, so I'm going to clean it up, but he hits the ball and he turns around, and he could have said a lot of stuff. And he said, GD.
Yeah.
Took the Lord's name in vain. And look, I'm like, that's Ralph Reed, head of the Christian Coalition, And that was just that was a shocker to me. I don't know why, but that stands out of that entire
Yeah.
trip of watching Ralph Reed go, GD.
Wow. Well, hey, many will credit Donald Trump with coining the phrase fake news, but I think our audience need to know it was you that coined the phrase fake news. But I think you need to tell a little. I mean, what was it like living in our cul-de-sac? For our listeners, we lived in Heath, Ohio at one point. And Bob and
English
I,
Oaks Court.
English Oaks Court. We lived in the same cul-de-sac. I literally had too much to drink at Bob's house one Saturday afternoon, and this house went up for sale across the street. And I said, well, hell, I'll buy that house. And bought a house I couldn't afford on a whim on a Saturday after 6 beers. So there we lived right across the street from each other, and it became a bit of a circus. I mean, what was that? What was it like, the media coverage of your investigation after school?
Oh, wow. I mean, they were in my backyard, NBC News. I saw the lights. My wife's panicking. So I did what you should do. I composed myself, went outside and said, I have a gun. I'm going to shoot you. And I could see him scream. I said, I have a shotgun. I'm going to shoot you. And then there was this reporter came across the mailbox there because Matt's house was just one house in between us. And he was really creepy looking. He really was. I mean, he was a scary looking guy. He sort of looked like Rasputin. And my wife panicked and thought it was some maniac coming to harm her. So I wrote to, sent an email, and I'm like, hey, big man. I did that to another reporter who was shorter than I. I'm not big. I'm 5'8", but he was shorter than me. I'm like, hey, big guy, meet me outside. Come on. You want to fight? But come on, I'll take you on. And the New Philadelphia newspaper printed it. Of course, I'm from Belmont County. You guys are from the Valley. They're like, yeah, go get him. They did it to my wife. I'd beat him up too. Yeah, you should have shot him, And but I did that. I called the editor, and he's like, you dared us to print it. I go ahead. I don't care. Yeah, so I did that too. Yep.
I mean, towards the end, it was crazy. I mean, we'd have reporters in our neighborhood all the time. So
everywhere.
We would drive
In
out
the
of our
neighborhood.
neighborhood, and then we were afraid that we were bugged.
Absolutely.
Car was bugged. So we would go out into the woods to talk. Not to just even, I mean, we weren't conspiring anything. And I told Bob from the beginning, there's no way I'm ever going to lie for anybody. I just told the truth the whole time. But I mean, the government was after all of us in such a way. I mean, obviously after Bob more than anybody, but they wanted
would slip.
that pelt,
they would do things. They would slip under our press secretary's door at midnight, slip a card, and then say, well, why do you want to get a lawyer, when he would call them back? They would do these midnight calls. They called one.
My first call was at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday night from the FBI.
Oh, yeah. And they called a 12-year-old kid. His dad was a friend of mine. I had not seen his dad actually in maybe 12 years or so. And they said, hey, tell your father he's under investigation with the Bob Ney investigation, stuff like that, to make people freak out. And we would get these phone calls. Everybody thought everybody was bugged. Everybody was paranoid.
You guys sound like you were in the woods like Tony Soprano and John.
That's the way it was, Cory. I mean, seriously, every one of our conversations, we had to go out there because we just were so paranoid that even talking about winning re-election and how we were spending campaign dollars, everything was under such a microscope. We had to go do that. There was no other choice. It was a wild time, and then you throw excessive alcohol into the mix. It was crazy. So,
well, what really freaked?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but what freaked the government out was this, Cory. Brabender, or not Brabender, that was my media people. Public Opinion Strategy called me, and they said, "Look, you've had a great career. If you quit right now, probably this will go away. And but Mickey Mouse is going to beat you." This was in December 2005.
Right.
Mickey Mouse is going to beat you. And I called up Matt. Mickey Mouse is going to beat me. And Matt does one of these, you want to give up or you want to stay in? You want to a Tony Soprano thing, And I'm like, I want to stay in. And so we have some drinks, and the next day we have coffee when we're sober. You want to stay in? Yeah, we're going to fight this thing. And we did. And that really freaked the government out, because they kept threatening from January on to indict me every 2 weeks. And my lawyers would be like, go ahead and indict him, and hanging the phone up. I'm like, be nicer to them.
Let me add a little color to that too. So it's interesting. Glenn Bolger, who is like the eternal pessimist, who's a very good pollster, and I've worked with Glenn at different times, and one of my business partners just worked with him last election cycle. But Glenn is pessimistic. I mean, he never leads with the good news. It's always the bad news first. And so he does this poll, and he literally said, "Bob, Mickey Mouse will beat you. You can't win. You need to get out of the race." And that's the wrong thing to say to Bob. That's the wrong thing to say to me. Like, I just want to, especially I was young and dumb at the time. And so we were like, we're getting a second opinion, getting another pollster. And so we have the Terrence group do a survey, and it was worse. It was worse numbers. I mean, it was. And so we didn't know what to do, like, because Bob and I were probably the only ones that wanted to stay and fight. Everybody else was, kind of pusses and wanted to step away. And so Bob says, look, we're going to get everybody together in Zanesville, Ohio, in the center of the district. Every elected official, every county chairman. I'm just going to lay all my cards on the table, let them know what we're facing. And if there's an overall consensus in that room that I should get out of the race, I'll get out of the race.
Yep.
And we got there, and I'm telling you, it was like 1,000% support, because unlike a lot of members of Congress today that are very self-serving, Bob always invested heavily in the Republican infrastructure of Eastern Ohio. So there was how many county commissioners that got campaign contributions from Bob, that our volunteers went and knocked doors for that county commissioner, the county chair. Every time they needed a speaker, Bob would fly in from DC and speak. He was a giving person, not just doing work for his constituents, but also doing work to build the Republican Party, which back then, frankly, we had to do. That was not a Republican district. It was a very purple district, and we had to fight to beat Democrats all the time. And Bob was always willing to put his neck on the line for local county officials. And so when his neck was on the line, they all said, give him hell, Bob. And I mean, I think we had 90% of all the elected officials and county parties endorse Bob. And we won 67% of the vote in that primary, which shocked the world.
They were great. And they told us we couldn't. And we took such a vote, because that year Tom DeLay was in trouble. The feds didn't go after him. The state did. Tom DeLay spent some enormous amount of money and took 52% of the vote or something like that. So we really looked good, because we were out of money, because I went to John Boehner and I wanted money. And John said, I can remember he took a sip of Merlot and went, I don't think so.
It was the weirdest meeting I've ever, to this day, the weirdest meeting I've ever been a part of. Yes. Sitting there, sitting with Bob, and all we asked the NRCC for was, Bob and I were the only ones in the meeting from our office. And we had polling numbers that we had. I mean, Glenn Bolger's like, you've done a 180. Like, your image is back to being above water. You have a fighting chance to beat Zach Space in the general election. And so all we wanted from the NRCC was for them to handle survey research and voter ID and some ground game stuff, so that we could afford to advertise, because we're hemorrhaging money on legal defense. Oh, yeah. And I mean, Boehner he had already had his mind made up. And I made my pitch, and I could have been talking to this painting right here. Like, he wanted nothing to do with it. And we left there saying, oh, crap.
But we won the primary. We were in high gear. And that's when the government kind of stepped in. And Alice Fisher couldn't get her appointment because she hadn't solved the Abramoff problem. And that's when she pulled the trigger. And then I went into rehab and made the decision to do a plea deal. I pled 18 months. I remember Mary, the lawyer for the government, stood up in court, and she said something to the effect of, Mr. Ney could have staved this off for years, and we fully agree with 18 months. And the judge looked at me and thought 30 looked better. So I got 30 months. And I was basically destitute. It was so embarrassing, the report that the bailiff and the court people put together. It's called PSI, pre-sentencing investigation. And in there, it basically says, Mr. Ney is indigent.
Yeah. How we kept you out of bankruptcy while you were in prison to this day baffles my mind.
I don't know. I left power of attorney with my house with Matt, and I called this guy. His name was George Bush at Countrywide. And I said, listen, and he said, well, you paid your payments for your house 6 months ahead of time. Call us when you default. I said, I'm going to be in prison. I can't call you. And I hung the phone up and gave power of attorney to Matt and walked away from the house. But it was just like juggling everything, packing the house up and doing all these things. But yeah, I got a 30-month sentence instead of 18. And the judge, I had what was called a victimless crime. There was no restitution. Abramoff had to pay maybe $38 million in restitution to the Indian tribes and things. I didn't have restitution, but she fined me. And And my lawyers were standing up in court when she fined me $6,000. I remember that day I had a 1 month recovery coin in my pocket. And I'm 30 days sober, and it's Friday the 13th, October. And I'm 30 days sober, and I'm standing there, and she's like, uh, I'm doing the plea deal. And then the sentencing, she did the $6,000 fine, and I'm standing there going, I'll never be able to pay 6,000 off.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, I
Yeah.
used to be a member of Congress, you make money. I mean, good money, I think. I'm like, how will I ever pay that off? Well, I'll worry about it later.
Crazy times. Well, I want to change gears, focus on some positive things that you did throughout your career. Cory, why don't you start by talking about stand up? Let's talk about stand up for steel a little bit. I mean, this is a huge deal. So we talk about stand up for steel. Look, the steel industry was the backbone of the Upper Ohio Valley. When I was born in 1981, just one steel mill, Weirton Steel, in my hometown, it employed almost 12,000 people. This was a huge economic engine, and that wasn't the only mill in the Upper Ohio Valley that impacted Bob Ney's district. There was also Wheeling Pittsburgh Steel and Wheeling Nishin and other places that produced steel. It was a coal and steel production drove Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio, Northern West Virginia for many, many years. Rob, I mean, growing up in Steubenville, Ohio, I mean, how many of your friends' dads worked in the mill?
A lot of them. And I can remember them getting laid off and looking for work and tough times. Really, I think for a lot of our listeners, it's important to understand the region. So it's really sort of the greater Pittsburgh, region, Appalachia, if you will, where it's blue collar, hardworking, as Matt said, steel and coal were the driving industries. And over the last 50, 60 years, really over the last 30, there's been a major decline that sort of reshaped the politics of the area too. So to put you back in the 1990s, the area was probably more democratic.
Probably.
In a lot of
I
ways.
didn't know any of.
Yeah.
I was like, my family was like the only Republican family in our neighborhood. There were, in all of my mom's side of the family, they all grew up as Democrats and started to make a change around Ronald Reagan. And so, I mean, but it was a very Union Democrat area. To put in perspective, Belmont County, in Ohio, where my wife grew up and I once lived when I worked for Bob managing his campaign, George W. Bush only got 37% of the vote against Al Gore in 2000. That just tells you how
and I would
it was.
And I would bet Donald Trump probably took
over
70%.
Yes. And there's not a
this
single
last
elected
time
Republican or Democrat anymore, pretty much anywhere in the Ohio Valley.
So if you track the politics, like you said, going back to Reagan started winning a lot of these Reagan Democrats from Steubenville and Weirton and these areas on a lot of cultural issues, on abortion, on gay rights, on guns. He went after a lot of these voters and said, hey, these guys hunt, they fish, they go to church, they're hardworking, they should be Republicans. And so he picked off a lot of traditional conservative Democrats who started voting Republican in the 80s. Now, in the 90s, during the Stand Up for Steel campaign, the area was still majority Democratic. But after NAFTA and a lot of WTO violations of Chinese dumping of steel, the area became a little bit more Republican. And then today, going back to 2016, Donald Trump has carried that area the last two elections overwhelmingly. And to give a little bit of local history, Jefferson County, where I'm from, was one of the only two counties that out of Ohio's 88 that Ronald Reagan lost in 1984.
Yeah.
I mean, Walter Mondale carried Jefferson County, and I think Donald Trump probably carried it, by 30, 40 points this last time, and it's trending even further that way. And steel was important, and to bring this back to Bob Ney, in 1996 to 1998, thinking Bill Clinton's second term, a Republican opposing trade deals, supporting public housing programs with Maxine Waters and Barney Frank, getting endorsed by labor unions as Bob Ney was. This was a big
to do all
deal.
those things just to get elected. It was a very much of a
Right.
swing district that had been historically a Democrat district. And to put it a little more
And he-
perspective
and-
on Weirton
and-
too. The Weirton Millsop Community Center, where I grew up playing basketball and going to the pool and all those things, they had a statue of John F. Kennedy. And then Bill Clinton did a campaign stop in 1992 in Weirton, West Virginia, and they had a massive portrait of Bill Clinton campaigning in Weirton, and they were so proud to elect Bill Clinton. And Weirton Steel was producing steel more efficiently than any plant in the world. But China, Russia, other countries that were subsidizing their steel industry, also Brazil, they're subsidizing their steel industry, and then they were dumping the steel in the U.S. And the auto manufacturers had a much stronger lobby than the steelworkers and the steel union. And so they won out. Clinton didn't protect the workers in the Ohio Valley. He decided to be with the auto industry and supported these trade deals that allowed for the dumping. And some of it, what's crazy, some of it was being dumped illegally. It was against our trade policy. And the Clinton administration was allowing it to happen anyway. And Bob stood up. There wasn't a lot of people in Congress willing to stand up because there's very few steelworkers in the United States. It's in certain select regions of the country. And so, I mean, frankly, our country, still to this day, we're feeling the effects of it, that we have decided fundamentally we aren't going to produce steel in the United States of America. There's very little steel to this day produced. But Bob was able to fight and at least get some protection for the American workers. And the steel industry lasted a little bit longer than it would have if Bob would have stood up and led this rally.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I remember my school, as students, I was probably 12 or 13 at the time. And I can remember us having stand up for steel rallies and people getting on buses to go to Washington, D.C., and Bob walking them all up to the White House and actually going inside the White House. So he did remarkable work. There's no doubt in my mind that he believed in it. But the politics of it are tricky because, NAFTA was originally a plan developed during the first Bush administration. And this is a little known fact, but when Bill Clinton took office, a little known staffer by the name of Rahm Emanuel was looking to increase his role and clout within the West Wing. And he dusted off NAFTA and made it a Clinton proposal. That went from a Bush proposal to a Clinton proposal. And the reason was Bill Clinton was a triangulator. He had to play to the middle. He believed in compromising. And so in order to get some of the things he wanted done in his first budget and in later deals on welfare reform, et cetera, he had to give the Republicans something. And NAFTA was overwhelmingly supported by the Republicans. And Bob went against his own party. Today, it's nearly flipped. You have former President Trump and a lot of the more conservative members are more protectionist, more populist, opposing trade deals, and you still have sort of the Wall Street country club Republican, as I call them, that support free trade, low taxes, market economics, etc. And on the Democratic side, you've got everywhere from Bernie Sanders, who sounds more like Donald Trump on trade than he does Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell. So the politics of this are a little sticky to this day and confusing, but at the time it was not confusing. Republicans were for this deal, and Bob Ney went against his own party to help his communities. And I think that's why people kept sending him back. They saw that he was for real. They saw that he meant it, and they saw that he was willing to fight. And the number one thing for voters, this better than anybody, voters look at a candidate and they either see you as one of us or one of them. and you don't want to be one of them. And Bob Ney was one of us. And even until his darkest hours, 10 years after that, he still won his primary with 2/3 of the vote, and probably would have won the general election if he stayed on the ballot.
Stand Up for Steel, Stand Up for America, obviously, which you're a huge part of, you and Mark
Oh,
Galipis
yeah.
from the local in Weirton. And when I worked for Congressman David McKinley, we
Yeah.
had a great relationship
Yeah.
with Mark as well. And, just watching you on TV as a kid and try to stand up and protect my family's jobs, because my grandfather worked in the tin mill.
Mhm.
And my dad, I had cousins and family all worked there. But I actually found this before we came on the air, a little tin can from Weirton Steel.
Wow.
So I thought that employee owned. So, but would love to get your take on that and just what a huge impact
Right.
that was that you did to stand up for our jobs.
And also the
Well,
bad news now too, that Weirton Steel is officially closed for the most part.
I know.
It's heartbreaking.
Well, how it started, we went to Clinton and appealed to a Clinton, and I figured, okay, steelworkers, Democrat, union, this is going to be a cakewalk. And all of a sudden there was such resistance, which is eventually what cost Hillary her election against Trump. Hillary hated trade deals till there was a vote, and then she liked them. And you look at the states and what happened with Trump and China and things like that. So we appealed to Clinton as much as we could, and then we the steel workers, Mark Galipis, he was what an angel for the steel workers. Wow. With Independent Steelworkers Union, we had Leo Gerard with the Steelworkers Union, but Galipis was day and night willing to do anything. Mark Galipis was in 1,000%. And we decided to do this Stand Up for Steel march. So 10,000 people, we marched down. I remember we marched by the Treasury because Rubin was the treasurer for Clinton. He was a Wall Street guy, totally against us, loved trade deals, And I remember we stopped by the Treasury and we were yelling about the jobs and save our jobs. So we got to the gates of the White House. Before I got there, Bill Livingood was our sergeant of arms, and he called me and he said, please do not get arrested down there. When they tell you to move away from the gate, you're chairman of House Administration, you oversee the Capitol Hill Police. We would prefer this not happen. And I said, well, okay, but I'm going to get arrested. Me and Mark are willing to do it, for the publicity, for the cause. So we went down there and blocked the gates with 10,000 people. And the White House security people were standing going like this, telling us back away. And the next thing you know, the gate opens and they tell me to come in. It's like, what do you do then? Well, we thought we were going to get arrested because they kept saying, please move back. You will be arrested. And I went inside and Bill Clinton's staff guy, main staff guy was there. His name was Lamb. And he is like, what do you want? And I said, we want the president to save these jobs. I said, there's mainly 10,000 Democrats out there, steel workers, and they haven't done anything wrong. And these people are dumping, this illegal steel at cheap prices in our market. And Clinton's got to do a 201. It's called a 201. It's a process through the Trade Commission. And he looks at me and he goes, can I ask a favor? And I said, what? And he said, you've got all the driveways blocked. Can you please tell them to unblock the driveways? So we went out, and there were people on horseback, automatic weapons, the whole 9 yards. And the late Sheriff Abdullah, some guy got out of order. He wrestled him down to the ground. Fred was the greatest guy. He's passed away. Fred Abdullah was just a gem. He wrestled the guy down to the ground in a headlock that was doing something. Anyway, so we go out, and I said to Liam, I want you to go talk to Mark Galipis. And he went out, and he was talking through the gate. I said, let him in. So they opened the gate, and Mark came in. So we didn't get arrested. And the Clinton staffer told me it was the first time that he saw that a member would come down there to protest something that he wasn't arrested. He said it was, you need to know they opened the gates. And I said, that's because we have 10,000 basically union Democrats out there is what we have. Clinton turned us down. We found out later George Soros had a lot of involvement with flooded steel, foreign steel. Clinton turned us down. Then we went after George Bush. And the final decision, Karl Rove called me upstairs. I remember I was headed to Afghanistan the next morning, and he called me up and he said, we can do, I don't know, we needed a percentage, 24%. I said, I need 28, like a poker game. And the president went with the percentage we needed and the 201. So Bush stepped up to the plate. Now, unfortunately, it was all too late. Had we been able to do it earlier, like during the Clinton administration, we might have had a fighting chance. And then there was permanent trade status, which I call the Clinton Gingrich unholy alliance. That passed. That was one of the biggest mistakes in American history. And now we're in a different situation where Trump was the first candidate I can remember in modern American history that said, I'll go after China. And he did. And Biden kept the tariffs. Biden kept them. So that keeps a bit of a fear balance. I think some fear with China, as much as they can be afraid, keeps a little bit of balance for us. So, yeah, thanks for. I know you had to have supported it, your family and everybody else under the sun down there in Weirton. It was a great movement. It was very moving. I consider it one of the best things that I was ever involved with in my life.
And I think one of the reporters that eventually I worked with in David McKinley's office, and you worked with had on maybe house admin or personal office, Jim Forbes.
Oh yeah, sure,
yeah,
absolutely, yeah. He came out to D.C. to work for us.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about school tours earlier, Rob. I know you want to bring up something Bob said to all of us numerous times that stuck with all of us. So why don't you go ahead and take the floor?
You guys are taking me down memory lane.
Yeah,
I'm getting old. I'm getting old. I don't remember some of this.
No, I'm taking you down memory lane, but it's relevant to a current, public issue. When we would go down on the House floor with you, you would turn on the voting lights, and the students would learn how to vote. And you would point out Hammurabi's Code, all of the statues. Each state gets to put 2 statues in the Capitol. And one time we were walking through the rotunda, and you looked up to the top of the rotunda, and I said, does it ever get old? And you said, if it ever gets old, it's time to go home.
Time to go home. Yeah.
And there was I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but the reverence we all learned for the building, the respect that we had for the Capitol Hill Police. I mean, years later, I would bring my puppy in every morning, and the Capitol Hill Police would have dog treats for her at different entrances. And those were the thoughts that were going through my head on January 6th. I've never heard what you think about it. I just wanted to hear, as a former chairman of House Administration, what was going through your mind watching that? And then what do you think today about former President Trump referring to those guys as hostages and promising to pardon them?
Right. A couple of things. And I remember saying that, I do, about the feeling I get every time I went in a building. And after I got out of prison, Ellen Ratner, who loves you.
I love Ellen.
And Matt, in her own way.
Yeah.
She
kind of loves me.
In her own way.
She does.
I went with you and Ellen.
Respect you, Matt. They have a disagreement on some issues, but she just loved Rob's writing, and and he came over to an event and things. But Ellen, I was starting down this path for a reason about Ellen. Anyway, it'll come back to me. As far as the Capitol itself, we had all these duties, but one was the Capitol Hill Police. And I remember on 911 when the police were standing out there telling everybody, run, and they stayed at the Capitol to make sure everybody got out of there. Of all the things that I did, one of the biggest enjoyment I had was the Capitol Hill Police. And when we had anthrax and other problems in the Capitol, I worked with Steny Hoyer. He was just fantastic to work with. He's still, of course, in the House. He put aside politics. Doesn't exist today that way. Steny and I could have, yelled at each other and blamed each other over 911. and the anthrax in the Capitol and the security. We could have done that. We didn't do it. We made sure nobody else did it. We made sure that we worked for the best interests of people in that building. And what I was going to say about Ellen was this. When I got out of prison, she said, you have house privileges, because I resigned. They didn't Santos me. So you have house privileges. She said, we want to eat in the dining room. So I called and made reservations for the media in the dining room. And when we went up to the door that night, I was taking Ellen and about 6 reporters to go inside to eat. And I was going to stop. I said to Ellen, I'm going to stop at the door, show my ID. You can go in. I'm not going in. I had not been back in the Capitol. And as I walked to the Capitol, I got, even though I left on terms that I wasn't proud of or happy with, I saw that building and I'm like, wow, same feeling, I felt semi home. But I said, Ellen, I'm not going in. And Ellen Ratner, both of you. Oh, you're going to go in? Yeah, you have to go in. No, I said, Ellen, I'm not going in. So I walk up to the door and I pull out my ID, and the officer standing there says, you don't need that ID, sir. Welcome back, Mr. Chairman. Wow. And the head of parking happened to be out there. This was the night of the State of the Union. And he came up and hugged me and started crying. So I went inside. And when I went in, 3 of the ladies that worked in the House dining room came up to me, and they were crying, and they said, "Oh, Mr. Ney, there's so many other people we wish went to prison in this building, not you." So I sat there, and members came over. I didn't go bother members, and I mean, it was nice. I had that same feeling, Rob. I didn't think I would because how I left, but I had that. That was my first night back in, and it was strange, but it was comforting when that officer said, "Welcome home." So, in my heart, because what our committee did, we were intricately involved with a painting on the wall in the Capitol. Anything that happened with the Capitol. But the most intensity that I had in that Capitol was the anthrax, because Steny Hoyer and I, and the other members of the committee that worked with us, and Pelosi and Hastert, both the minority leader and the speaker, we wanted to make sure that those staffers that went in that building every day returned home to their families. We wanted to make sure that happened. We owed that for their safety and security of the Capitol. Keep it open, but make it safe and secure. And so we worked diligently with so many of the staff people on our staff, to do that and the minority staff, obviously. And there was not one single time politics was played. So I'm building up to the fact that I have a same feeling for that building as I've always had, intricately involved in its operation from sub-basement up, and the Capitol Hill police in particular were my favorites. They put their life on the line. I remember when the crazy man came across the street and shot the first officer, and then went down and shot the other officer in Tom DeLay's office. I remember that. I remember all those types of things. So the day that happened, and as you know, I call radio stations. I'm a political analyst for radio stations in 5 different states. And after that happened, they asked me the same question, and I had been on the Electoral College board. Dick Cheney was behind me in 2004. I know what Cheney could do or not do, or what I could do or not do as a person on the Electoral College board. You call the votes, they give the votes, you take them. But anybody that says that those people were tourists or sightseers are just wrong. The people that came in and did destruction to that building had absolutely no right to go do that. And people died. And police officers were injured. And I'll tell you something else, and I've said this on radio. If at the time, if people were going over the fence of the White House, I'll ask you what would have happened to those people. We all know what would have happened to them. They would have been gunned down. Tear gassed, and if they didn't stop, they would have been shot. The restraint shown by the Capitol Hill police was absolutely amazing. People broke through the windows. They didn't know if they had automatic weapons, if they had guns, or they didn't.
Well, they're trained to do that. They're trained
sure.
to de-escalate
Sure.
the situation.
And they did. They weren't walking people through. They were keeping it now that they were in the building. But I think it's disgraceful what happened in the building. I don't think any of them had a right to do it. And they have went through the court process, whether you do a plea deal. I did a plea deal. Once you do a plea deal, you're guilty. You can say, oh, I really didn't do it. I just had to do a plea deal. It doesn't matter. Or they were sentenced. And it should remain that way. It should remain that way. I probably would have been an outsider in Congress, maybe. But people in Congress that served there with me, they know this was not a sightseeing tour. They know that. It was destruction that should never have happened.
If I was president right now and the issue came up on pardoning any of the January 6 folks, I would pardon any of them, not the ones that attacked the police or stole something or had major destruction, if they said, I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize to the country for it. I apologize to the Capitol Hill Police. The premise of why I was there was wrong. Because let's not forget, I mean, there's basic causation. Would there have been a Stop the Steal rally had there not been the lie that the election was stolen? I mean, this was set up long in advance. And to me, it's sort of the lowest bar possible to leap over is to say, okay, there are election and voting irregularities in every election. The Department of Homeland Security Chief of Staff, who was a Republican, said this was the most clean election we've had in American history. He was then promptly fired for saying that while Trump was still president. And a lot of these folks came to Washington because their leader, who they believe in, said, you were cheated out of this election too. I was cheated. You were cheated. Let's go take our country back. So a lot of these folks came there on the premise that the election had been stolen, that their democracy was being taken from them, and that Mike Pence could do anything about it. And we know he can't, or he couldn't, because if that were true, if Biden loses in November, which he might, Vice President Kamala Harris can then say, well, we're not going to take these electors. No Republican in their right mind would accept that. But I believe that folks that once they pay their debt to society should be able to be rehabilitated, should be able to vote, should be able to find jobs. I don't want these people punished forever. But they've got to admit that this was wrong. What I did was wrong, and I'm sorry about it, and move on. And I mean, isn't there some sort of accountability at the top for former President Trump?
I mean, I agree with you. Like I said, if they pled guilty or they were sentenced, they deserve to do the time. Now, what you're talking about is a whole separate issue. If people are truly repentant, we're a country of second chance. Yeah, I mean, I could see that if they're repentant. To just say though that they're patriots, let them go. No, a lot of people that support Trump don't buy into that. They really don't. But this is a weird election. I mean,
we talk about it another time. But I want to go through two things before we end our time with Bob. Bob, we have a thing called the Final Nine, as we're going to do. Final 9 questions, kind of like playing the Final 9 holes. These are one word answers if you can, short, brief answers.
I'm in politics.
And then,
crazy? Go ahead.
I know. I want to get a short answer, and then I want to give you some time at the end to talk about sobriety, because I think it's huge. And ultimately, we're going to have you back another time because there's too much we did not cover tonight. But number 1, greatest legislative accomplishment.
Help America Vote Act.
Greatest legislative regret.
The greatest regret? Voting to give the president full faith and authority in Iraq. Absolutely. Okay. I thought I was doing the right thing, but that's it.
Al, let me interject something. One of the reasons that I like President Trump, and this is another discussion for the day, but I don't like all these foreign wars that are nonsense. And I like the fact that he had a more restrained approach on foreign policy, because one of the greatest honors of my life was going around throughout the 16 counties in the 18th congressional district of Ohio, going to funerals
Funerals.
of fallen soldiers.
Up,
And
yeah.
that totally impacted me to this day, where it was absolutely gut wrenching, especially when you sit back and think we didn't accomplish anything.
Right.
In fact, we made matters worse. But
Yeah,
I'll
Trump
leave
kept
that
us out
there.
of a lot of things.
Who will be president in January 2025?
As of today, Trump.
Yeah, I mean, what's your prediction, Trump?
Trump.
All right. How many times did you almost fire me for being a terrible driver?
Countless. But I still love you.
I only wrecked 3 cars.
Countless.
That's fine. Who do you consider to be your most famous or infamous staffer? Former staffer.
Cory Lewandowski.
That's what I thought. Not, hey, I'm going to tell Mike Carey. It wasn't you, Congressman Mike Carey.
No, Cory's he's an angel. Carey is, yeah.
Who was your favorite colleague in Congress?
Steve LaTourette.
Who was your least favorite colleague?
Well, Steve LaTourette, Republican, Steny Hoyer, Democrat.
Who was your least favorite?
Gee. Rosa DeLauro. I didn't serve with AOT. Yeah, Rosa DeLauro, I guess.
All right. How many times have you been slapped in the face by a president of the United States?
Once. George Bush.
Go ahead. Add a little color to that one.
Well, Andy Card and I had gotten into an FU contest on the phone because Boehner told him I would cut Head Start. I would vote, okay. And it was on the line, tied. What do I want to cut Head Start for? It helps kids. I mean, so Andy Card called me, and then finally he said, "You're a liar. You told Boehner you'd vote to cut Head Start." I said, "No, I didn't tell Boehner that. I told him I would consider it, okay? I didn't say I'd do it. I said, I'll take a look at it," because Boehner's like, "Well, at least keep an open mind." And he said, "You're a liar." And I said, "You can F yourself." He said, "You can F yourself." I said, "So what you're telling me is in 2004, George Bush can't put his hand on that Bible unless he says, 'I got all the kids. I got them all. Got them all.'" I said, "Is that what you're telling me?" And so anyway, I go into the meeting because the president wanted CAFTA, Central America Free Trade Agreement. So when I go into the meeting, who they set me next to? Andy Card. And then there's Karl Rove, Dick Cheney, and should I tell who was the current? There's a current congressman. He's such a great guy. Bob Aderholt was there.
Okay.
And he was kind of new, and he's really, Bob Aderholt is a truly Christian, honest guy. One of the most honest I've ever seen. Well, we're sitting there, and I said to him, there's the square. See that square? Nobody was there except he and I. And should I be telling this, you think? Okay.
Yeah, no, why not?
And I said, that's the
statute of limitation.
I said, that's the BJ room. Bob, being the good Christian he's like, "What? What's the BJ?" I explained, that's the BJ room. That's where Clinton and Monica were in the hallway. Anyway, so they all come in, and George Bush is sitting there, and he said, "We're going to stop Chavez." In my book, Sideswipe, I tell this story, this will stop Chavez, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. And I said, Chavez will be there when you're not. So we went on, and he's telling us stuff. And when we're leaving, Rob Portman was there too, who was the trade rep. He had taken Rob out of the house, made him trade rep. And as we're walking out the door, Karl Rove was there. I said hi to Karl. And George Bush said, "Hey, what do you think about my appointment of Rob Portman?" And I said, "We're really, really pleased in the house." He said, "You are?" And I said, "Yeah, you got him out of the house. You made our life easier." And he gave me a love tap. He's right across the cheek. Oh, yeah.
Well, wrapping up here, we're going to be hearing about Bob's story to sobriety. And let me tell you, this is a man who was a very functional alcoholic for many years, who late in his career became a raging alcoholic. I could sit here and tell stories and stories and stories about some of the crazy things he did. We don't need to relive that. The good news is that Bob got the help that he needed. And that's really what's so critically important. 17 years almost he's been sober now. And I've said for a long time, it's amazing. He's done more good. All the great things he did in Congress, in the Ohio State Senate, and the Ohio House of Representatives over a long career in politics. He did a lot of great things. He's done more great things in the last 16 plus years through AA and mentoring and being a sponsor to addicts and alcoholics. And what's crazy, it's totally anonymous. We'll never know those stories, but I know some of those stories because it's touched personally close to home on numerous occasions. And I used to go to AA meetings with Bob for support. And this is a changed man. And it's a program, if we have any listeners, frankly, that are struggling with alcoholism, addiction, we just encourage you to get help. And there's help out there that's needed. And Bob's actually a great resource that we can connect you with on that. But Rob, I mean, maybe you saw some of it. I lived as his neighbor. I saw it on a daily basis. It was really bad. And he wouldn't have lived another 5-6 years if he kept on that lifestyle.
Yeah, I saw the before and after really clearly. During the investigation, and he was still in office and I was still working for him. During the day, sometimes, you could see like his face was red. He might be 3, 4, 5 deep by 2 in the afternoon.
I mean, he'd get Bud Light right into the coffee mug in the mornings. So it looked like he was drinking coffee, even though he'd drink a beer early on.
I know. I toward the end of the investigation and his time as chairman of the committee, I was driving him around DC pretty regularly, to dinners or to meetings. And I remember one night, and I didn't really think that he was ever in danger. I was young and optimistic, and I didn't want to believe it. And we were driving one night, and he just kind of looked at me and said, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this totally fine. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, of course we are. But it was the first time I heard him kind of show some doubt, just the fact that he felt like he had to tell me that we were going to be okay. And then I went over to a meeting. I think our office number was 2438 Rayburn.
I think so.
It used to say, I would know the meeting request was important when it would say RWN 2438. So I went over to the meeting one afternoon, and his face was red, and I could tell he was several deep on the Bud Lights. And this is when I knew we weren't going to be okay. He was smoking a cigarette at his desk, and there was a fully lit cigarette in the ashtray. And you could just tell, like, he was, unhealthy, and he was drinking, and he was stressed out. I mean, any of us would have been stressed out going through what he had on his shoulders at that point in time. I mean, I look back on it and I just, you feel for him because, nobody wants to go through that type of public disaster every single day, that stress. And then fast forward to when he got out of jail, out of prison. And I forget I think it was the week he got out. I picked him up and we got dinner at a Turkish restaurant in Columbus that he really likes. And he had lost about 60 pounds. He had his color back. He looked great. He looked healthy. I'd never seen somebody more at peace. We had a great dinner. He came over and spent time with my family at my niece's christening. She's now 15 years old.
Time flies.
Turning 16 in July. So that was about 16 years ago when he got out. And I saw the change. I saw the change physically, mentally, emotionally. And when people say that, no one changes, I think they're wrong. And they obviously haven't met Bob Ney.
I remember you going to the Cleveland Clinic, I think kind of unwillingly.
Oh, yeah.
And even getting a phone call from you when I was in Morgantown at a football game saying to come get you, and I hung up the phone on you.
Yes.
And I've been just absolutely blessed and honored and just thrilled to watch your life blossom from that point forward, and your sobriety has just been an unbelievable testimony. And just give us some insight to that, and we'll wrap it up after that.
Well, and by the way, I was so angry at you at the time. I'm like, pick me up. I'm going to fire you. I did one of those. I want you to come get me now. I was in the Cleveland Clinic. I did not.
You did. You offered to fire me, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you're already going to prison. So
Yeah.
like, what?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I was so angry. Of course, you did in recovery the exact right thing to do to somebody. You really did. And I just didn't know it at the time. But my lawyer got on the phone with me because I was having such a hard time. And I had made the statement to Bill Lawler, wonderful guy, Notre Dame guy. And I had made the statement to Bill Lawler that my kids would be better off if I was dead because I could get an insurance policy paid if I had not exited Congress yet. I could get the policy paid. And he was worried, and he had Mark Toohey call me. And I remember Mark Toohey said, listen, I am not judgmental. I have alcoholism in my family. I am the least judgmental person. But he said, I should be thrown out of the legal profession if I make you a decision in your current state. And I'm thinking, what current state? How bad is it? My life's imploding. I'm headed to prison. What's so bad about that? And obviously I was drinking so heavily. And so he said, go somewhere. You need to go somewhere. And I went to the Cleveland Clinic. And then I went to Woods of Parkside outpatient, got a great counselor, met a lot of great people, went to my first recovery meeting in Newark, and I was all, icky about it, and walked in there, and a guy afterwards said, we're not supposed to do this, but I know who you are, and you were so good to veterans, and I used to come to your office, and I felt, good about things. But I got into the program, got into a wonderful program, which, by the way, they should offer the recovery program rehab to every prisoner, not just 60 people every 3 months in Morgantown. Every prisoner in America should have a chance. Because in the prison system, remember, we don't have a majority of the Medellin drug cartel. We've got addicts who got arrested and they became drug dealers, but they need help in the addiction process. So I continue through that. I have 17 and a half years of continuous sobriety, but one day at a time. That's what everybody has. And so that's what, that did for me going to prison. Wonderful rehab program. And when I got out, I've been able to continue with recovery. I've seen some people make it, and I've seen some people not make it. And if somebody has a problem, they need to go to recovery meetings and not fear. They will be welcome there. In fact, I call it sometimes cheap psychiatry for $1 donation if you want to in the basket. It's a lot of great people. They're just, some of them are sick and need to get better. So it's been a big part of my life. I've met some absolutely wonderful people and counselors, but I do want to stress the prison system is full of people who would be better off served in rehab than warehoused in a federal prison. It's unbelievable.
And maybe, as our show grows, we can do something to draw more attention to that. And one of our goals is to eventually have events, and I would love to raise money for some of that.
Matt, if there's time, I'd like to just say one more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thing. The week that you got out of prison, we met up and got lunch at a Turkish restaurant.
Yes.
Outside of Columbus. And I invited you to my niece Ella's christening.
Yes.
At my sister's house in Columbus. And you had been in the news. And when you first got out, I had never seen you more at peace. I mean, you look great. You just seemed at peace, and you had not changed a bit. Mm-hmm. And I could not have been more proud to bring you to meet my whole family.
Oh, it was wonderful. I met them all.
And the entire group, not once was it, who's this guy that just got out of prison? It was like, that's Bob Ney. And he's been good to our family and good to our community. And my favorite thing from my takeaway from our time working together, working for you on the Hill, is that every bill you introduced that I was a part of, you tried to get a Democrat to work with or a Democrat to co-sponsor it. You worked on housing with Maxine Waters, Barney Frank. That taught me at the right point in my career that one side can't do it all alone. And then the other point I'd make was your vote against the Patriot Act at a time when anybody who challenged the orthodoxy on the wars or security was seen as a traitor.
Mhm.
And you were one of 2 or 3 people
Three.
that voted against it. I think the only Republican. And it impressed the hell out of me. And the fact that you weren't punished by it at home,
Right.
because you had already built up the trust with your voters that you were in it for the right reasons.
That's right.
You knew you weren't taking a vote that would hurt them and their security. And those are 2 issues that really shaped me as somebody who's now a Democrat. And I'm sure a lot of the viewers aren't going to like what I have to say, but it really impressed the hell out of me, and it helped shape how I view politics. And I wish it was still more like that.
You know, I did want to say one thing if I could, and that is that, God, the higher power of a person's understanding, whatever that may be for them, does give gifts. And somebody asked me one time, boy, I bet if you knew the outcome, you would, and you could go back and change it, you would never run again. That's not true. If I knew I couldn't change the ending, I would still have run. Both of you, and I know you did for Congressman McKinley, you did things for people. You really did. We had staff that did things for people, life-saving things in some cases for people. And it was the greatest experience I had. And I've been fortunate to meet Mother Teresa, the Dalai Lama, kings, queens, presidents, but it was regular people that just were amazing and that came in and out of my life. Amazing people that I met. But you all were very special, and you did a lot of great things for people. Like I told my friend Howard Monroe, does radio, as you know, in Wheeling. I said, when I die, if nobody's graffitied Jack Abramoff's name on my tombstone, go ahead and do it, Howard. Feel free. But we will know in our minds, all of us, that we did a lot of good things for people in the system, and it functioned a lot different in those days. You had more ability to have some civility to the system. So I take that as a good thing. It's been in my life, and it's helped me quite a lot. So I know that experiences have been wonderful. It's a gift from God.
Well, let me tell you, there's and I have some clients that I totally respect and love and work hard for, but there are not very many people like Bob Ney that exist anymore.
Nope.
And the whole system's changed. And what I'd like to do is table our discussion and get together in the Ohio Valley at some point.
Okay.
I don't golf, but you can. So the 3 of us golf. Bob, you can ride in a golf cart, and we can do some recordings there and maybe create another episode.
All right. Hey,
half
the
the
great
notes,
thing you
half
all
the
are
show notes
doing.
we didn't even get through.
It's a good thing you're doing. I think this is great. Golf and politics. It fits hand in glove. It sure does.
But we're hoping it can make an impact, and we can get back to some more civility sometimes. And but anyway, Bob, thank you so much for being a part of this.
All.
Thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. A little call to action here. Please follow us on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Golf and Politics, and we are on Twitter or X at Golf Politics Pod. Golf Politics Pod. Follow to learn more. This episode is going to be released on April 10th. We're so excited to get it started. We'll probably have to do this in 2 parts since we talked so long. But Bob, thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
Look forward to let's get this. Let's definitely try to get together in the Valley this
We'll
summer.
do that. Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys.
Appreciate it.
We'll see you.
Thank you.